There was a recent exchange that went viral online between Vivek Ramaswamy at a recent speaking engagement he did for TPUSA. And this exchange, while brief, running about 4 minutes, exemplifies, I think, one of the core reasons why it is important to understand the principles that undergird American civilization, and then not to simply understand them, because understanding is passive, but to vigorously defend them and articulate them in the public sphere without question and without fear. So in this video, we're going to go over the exchange, and I'm going to ask the question, because this is a key question that is brought up by the exchange. Can an American conservative belief be a project that includes as many people as possible, including people of different religious faiths? Or must it be a monoculture, as the theocrat will argue, that should only include people of one faith and one mind? Is that the fulfillment of the American project set forth in the 18th century? But before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I'm Christian Watt. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary of the philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get our message out there. Even if you disagree with me, my friends, we have almost 20,000 subscribers. I'm so happy. I'm so excited. I think that our message can really help people, and I think that more people need to think about politics, social issues with a more philosophical bent to their minds. So thank you all for being here. Now, please enjoy the video. So, before I get into this exchange, there's one thing I must say. On the American right, which has always been, I think, an alliance of various different ideologies. Back in the 60s, for example, you had people like Barry Goldwater and William F. Buckley who aligned with all kinds of different people. And the project called the Fusionist Project, where libertarians and traditionalists and all kinds of people just came together to fight communism. And ever since the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s, I think American conservatism has been having an identity crisis, one that has fluctuated. And ever since Trump got elected, I think that identity crisis is even more in flux, because a lot of people are now beginning to realize that, hey, you can believe things that are good for the nation, and you can support policies that are good for the nation, but you may not be a conservative if you do so, or not one in the traditionalist sense. So there's a lot of different debates going on. But amidst these debates, there are also factions that are rising up that fundamentally reject, in my opinion, what should be the vision of American conservatism, and also fundamentally reject the virtues of America's founding, and actually say the founding principles of Americanism were a mistake, or if they weren't a mistake, they were not strong enough in regards to how people believed certain things, how people had exercised their own personal moral affairs. And there are people who are arguing that the government should then come in and be a moral trendsetter, should come in and be a moral regulator that controls your personal conduct, that teaches you what to worship, how to think, in order to save society from the decay that leftism has wrought upon it. This is the thesis of this growing faction on the right wing. And I won't get technical with these people. There's a lot of different names for them, but I will not get technical. Just know there's a faction that is very skeptical of America as originally conceived. And so I think this recent exchange that Vivek Ramaswamy had, and I think Vivek actually represents the more traditionalist view of America, the more Americanist-based view of America, as opposed to this tradition. This dispute actually exemplified the tension between these two factions on the right. So let's walk through this dispute. And let me comment on it. Here is the first minute or so of the dispute, where the questioner attacks Vivek on his Hindu faith and calls him a pagan, calls his faith wicked, and asks him why he's being supposedly deceitful. Go.
Throughout the course of the lecture, you talked an awful lot about God and faith, and there were some men that come up here and they ask you about your Hindu religion, but my suspicion is if they didn't mention that, you would have omitted who that God was throughout the course of the entire lecture. And most of the people in this room here would leave thinking you were talking about the only true God, Jesus Christ. And God has a name, and Hinduism is a wicked pagan religion. And it's completely incompatible with America. Most everyone in this entire room is a Christian. They believe in Jesus Christ. And you've attempted to create this parallel, however tenuously, between Christian principles, Christian moral principles, and these Hindu values. and you look in sacred scripture and you see that all the gods of the Gentiles are devils, and there's only one name under heaven that can give you salvation. So my big question is, and you've talked about being forthright and transparent, my suspicion is that you would have omitted who that God was when you were speaking here tonight had you not explicitly been asked about Hinduism. So my challenge, I guess, to you going forward would be to say who this God is. Is it Wahaguru, the one that was blasphemously prayed to at the RNC? Is it one of these other Hindu deities? Or is it our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? So that's my question and challenge to you going forward.
Now, I must simply say this. This questioner seems to suggest that anyone who has a religious belief that is not Christian is somehow being anti-American. So for the edification of all, before we look at Vivek's response, I must now walk through very briefly one of the key intellectual currents of Americanism, American history, which is undoubtedly religious liberty. Now, for those of you who may not know, America was birthed in the 18th century. In the 17th century, it was a very, very dark place. This was in colonial America, and it was a very, very dark place. In the 17th century, depending on where you were in America, if you were a Christian of a different denomination, you can get killed, jailed, prosecuted. If you were in colonial Williamsburg in what is now Virginia, and you missed church, you could be drawn up towards the public and flogged. If you spoke ill words about people, you could have your head placed in a bridle where your tongue was impaled on a spike, so that if you spoke, your tongue would be impaled. So many different atrocities were committed, in my opinion, in the abuse and misuse of Christian principles for the desires of imperfect men who had, in my opinion, wicked hearts and indeed wicked imaginations. And so, but as time went on and the 18th century dawned upon the North American continent, different denominations began to break off from Puritans and different faith traditions began to form or come to America. And the fact that you had so many different traditions coexisting in a single area necessitated that there could either have been two possibilities. They all fight and they all get into bloody wars, or they establish their own places, and within those places, they try to avoid the kind of sectarian violence that had characterized the previous century. And this is what happened coming up towards the founding of America. Now, and this is one of the reasons why America has such a strong religious liberty tradition. When America was founded, it was people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin, and other people like John Witherspoon, who was the only clergyman to sign the Declaration of Independence, by the way, a very strong Presbyterian minister, and others advocated for religious freedom because they believed that conscience was the primary mover of faith, and conscience was also the primary activator of moral behavior. And that without conscience, one could not be a moral person, and without conscience, one cannot understand the divine and God. And so the entire point was to say that one's conscience should be shielded from external pressures of policy and power, from what they call the civil magistrate, and they should be able to conduct their religious affairs within their own personal sphere. This was to not protect government from religion. This was to protect religion from government, and this doctrine ultimately became known as the separation of church and state as the Constitution was birthed, and more debates continued to happen throughout American history, because it didn't stop after the signing of the Constitution. There was a discourse around the two sons of oil, which a lot of people in early America were upset over the kind of Jeffersonian posture towards religion. There was a big debate over that the philosopher Perry Bale participated in, so on and so forth. It's a very dense topic for a different day. But the point is this: within the American tradition, there is a strong tradition of religious liberty. Just for example, take this quote from William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, which was a haven for religious liberty, especially during Penn's time, and especially after Penn died, before it became a formal state. Penn said in his pamphlet, "The great case for the liberty of conscience. Imposition, restraint, and persecution for matters relating to conscience directly invade the divine prerogative and divest the Almighty of a due proper to none besides himself." Penn was making the point that if you attempt to direct someone's personal beliefs, you are interfering with their relationship with God. Ben Franklin, in the newly christened Republic, in a letter sent to Richard Price, another religious luminary of the American founding in 1780, essentially attacked the idea that there's going to be religious tests for public office and said, and I quote, that when a religion is good, I conceive that it will support itself, and when it cannot support itself, God does not take care to support. Essentially saying the government need not be the agent that props up religion. Religions will succeed or fail on their own merits. Again, this was the general sense of the founding generation, and this was what they baked into the constitutional structure. So when I hear this questioner say that Vivek, because he happens to be exercising conscience in accordance with his own religious virtues, it happens to be wicked or is believing a wicked system, I simply see an echo of an anti-American ideology, which does not respect conscience, which does not respect peaceful religious belief, and does not respect the freedom to choose what you choose to invest your mind in. And that, my friends, is far more anti-American and will always be more anti-American than someone having a faith that is somehow different than Christianity. And this is when I say, and I'll talk about it later in the video, that conservatism should probably be a pluralistic project, no matter what your religion is. No matter what your background is, if you agree to embody the eternal values upon which American civilization is built, you have a place in the conservative movement, and you should be considered, in my opinion, an ally of all that which is good to our country. But if you do not believe those things, and you object to conscience, and you object to conscientious practice of someone's peaceful religion, then in my opinion, you have no room, not just in the American conservative tradition, you have no room in America at all, and should probably be deported. Now, let's continue, and I mean that, by the way. I think that there's a lot of people that have legal citizenship that are legal Americans, but they're not actually philosophical Americans, and that is a problem that we need to really tackle, because that is going to be one of the, I think, corrosive elements of the future if we continue to let it go unabated. So, now Vivek responds, and his response, in my opinion, is not all that good. He doesn't really get to the heart of the matter, but I'll play you some of his response.
Believe me, your suspicion is off base. Listen to any number of the campaign speeches I gave, over thousands of them over the course of the last year. So we can take the disingenuous accusation off the table, but level with what I do think is an interesting...
Not forthcoming with that. You did not volunteer that information. It had to be pried out. You never volunteered that information.
So
you mentioned God,
that's actually
but you
that's actually false.
Omitted his name.
So let me know when you're done, and I can address your question. Good. So watch about the last presidential campaign of last year, and you apparently have had your head stuck in the sand, where it need not be belong. So the question of whether or not somebody of a non-Christian faith can embody and lead the United States of America at any meaningful level is an open question. Thomas Jefferson is on the other side of this question from you. Thomas Jefferson was not a traditional Christian. Do you know what the Jefferson Bible is? Exactly.
He's a
Thomas
deist
Jefferson
and a
is a
Freemason.
deist.
He's an enemy of Christianity.
So this is where we disagree, right? Is, as you heard, if you believe Thomas Jefferson is an enemy of Christianity because he is a deist, which is you just bring the microphone so you can confirm that.
But
yes,
you're running for politics in America.
Right.
And the purpose of politics is the temporal good here on earth. Okay, we're talking about good, and that's an objective thing. So we need laws that are going to govern society.
So you and I have a different point of view on this, and I think that the only point I would make to those who are listening as students, and I'm glad you're stepping up and asking a challenging question. I would advise you to next time leave the disingenuous accusations of motivation to one side, because there's a more interesting exchange for us to have. If you believe that Thomas Jefferson, as a deist, is somebody who would have been unqualified to be U.S. president, then I guess you and I see the future of the United States of America differently.
So you see there, he tries to appeal to Thomas Jefferson. And then he also says, well, perhaps, as opposed to directly confronting and getting deeper into the issue that the questioner raises, he simply says, well, perhaps we simply have different views of the country. In order for this to be a teaching moment, we have to articulate that beyond having different views of America, that there is a view of America that is correct, and there is a view of America that is fundamentally incorrect. And the incorrect view must be confronted in light of the American history of ideas and disproved in light of reason, or else it will continue to go unabated, and people will continue to think that there are different valid ways of seeing America beyond what it actually is. Sometimes there are several options to consider, and sometimes there are several options within a particular subject to consider. But more often than not, there is a right answer and there's a wrong answer, and the difference between wisdom and foolishness is understanding when the right answer comes into play and how to effectively dispel the incorrect answer in a way that is not demeaning, but in a way that is edifying. But when you're captured by your own premises, like this questioner is, that becomes fundamentally difficult. There's another thing I want to really get in here before I continue and address more of what was said. The questioner, when he first called Vivek's viewpoints wicked, and he first threw that salvo, he was operating from a point of personal tastes, as opposing to making an argument based on ethics. For someone that is going to be in public office or is going to have a political figure, we don't do religious tests in this country. We do moral tests based on ethics. Now, morality has had different meanings throughout the years. Some people believe that morality is simply what kind of personal conduct goes towards what should be good for oneself, like, for example, abstaining from drunkenness and things of that sort. Others believe that morality is simply a belief system that we have that can change with the wind or whatever. When I say morality, I mean objective rules that are norms that bind what we can and what we cannot do. So in other words, they make it possible for the society to exist because they limit the scope of social interaction to things that are acceptable for the existence of human peace, and then things that also preserve fundamental principles like justice, like truth, so on and so forth. So ethics, which is that I'm talking about, this kind of rules-based moral order, is what we should hold our politicians to. So we should expect our politicians not to lie, not to cheat, not to steal, not to kill, not to defraud. But if a politician, for example, happens to have a drinking problem, well, that may indeed be a personal problem that they need to fix, but that should not be a disqualifier for them to hold public office, because they may have very good ideas about how the country should operate, and they may adhere to the Constitution, and they may otherwise be a moral person. In other words, personal morality should be distinguished from broader rules-based moral principles that our founders used to construct what we know today as America. So when this person comes and says Vivek adheres to a wicked belief, what he's doing is he's coming at this from a point of rage, number one, which means he's not using his reason. And number two, he's trying to conflate personal taste or old-fashioned personal morality with actual rules-based ethics that are objective and apply to everyone, regardless of their religion. Now, something was said here that was not responded to, that I think was another missed opportunity for Vivek. The questioner said that politics, the goal of politics, is to preserve the temporal good. Now, a lot of people missed that. But as someone that studies philosophy, I hear a lot of very odd ideas about how politics in the world should be and what they are, and according to the people that argue for them. And this is one of the most sinister ideas that I think I've heard. One that I think was explicitly rejected by the founders when they founded this country. The truth is this, my friends: politics is not a tool for the temporal good. This is a pre-Enlightenment view that rests on a one-dimensional perspective about authority, power, and human nature that discounts observations that came later after the Enlightenment began. Authority, by its very nature, is not a moralizing force. It is at best a force that compels obedience. And everyone understands that moral action is about more than just obedience. Obedience is the second half of moral action, because obviously, if there's a rule that says do not kill, you have to obey that rule. But before you can obey that rule and you obey it consistently and obey it fruitfully, you must understand why killing is wrong. And you can understand this on several levels. Number one, your conscience. Your moral sense would, for most people who are not sociopaths, for sociopaths and psychopaths, this moral sense is not active, and that makes them dangerous. But for most people, their moral sense would say, okay, the idea of killing someone is repulsive to me. It's emotionally repulsive to me. I'm not going to do it. But regardless, this is a very important principle to indeed keep in mind. So authority authority at its best merely compels obedience, but authority at its worst brings out the worst impulses of those in authority. Even those that have good intentions can indeed be led a certain way by authority, because authority is not simply a tool. Authority is a tool that exists within the context of politics, and politics has been characterized so many different times throughout the years as an art of lying, stealing, and misrepresenting your positions in order to continue to hold on to power or in order to pursue some kind of ulterior motive. Therefore, politics is a tool that is ill-fitted to obtain or enforce any good, temporal or otherwise, because politics by itself as a concept is littered and full of evil and full of the worst impulses of humanity. Politics is a what they would call a necessary evil. I don't think any evils are necessary. It has become a necessary evil when in all reality it was originally a benevolent tool that was meant to, as I mentioned, preserve the rules-based order that was very limited and had a very limited implication for society and allow society to operate on its own. But when politics became intertwined with society and became the ruler of the people as opposed to the servant of the people, when politics became the master of the people, that is when it became evil. So that's one thing. But there's also a deeper problem here when it talks about the temporal good. Within ethics, there are these two competing theories between the good and the right. The good is merely actions that are said to bring about consequences that create a positive state of affairs. Whereas the right are certain rules and certain norms and ideas and principles that, regardless of a certain state of affairs, must be obeyed no matter what. So, for example, if there's a rule that says, do not lie, that does not mean do not lie unless lying manages to help 10 orphans get a home. No, it means do not lie. Do not kill, or do not murder, rather. It does not mean do not murder unless that murder helps save one person down the street who happens to be poor. But when you're fighting for the good, you can justify so many different atrocities in the name of pursuing a morally good end. This is one of the reasons why focusing on consequences and not principles is disastrous. And one of the reasons why the language of the American Constitution is fundamentally on the side of the right, so much so that Woodrow Wilson himself complained about this and said the Constitution is a Newtonian document guided by Newtonian laws which ignore the real realities of society, which are guided by the laws of Darwin. What he was saying is that society grows and changes, and if the Constitution does not grow and change with it, the Constitution is therefore useless, which is why Woodrow Wilson and the evil machinations of progressivism were some of the main players in the delegitimization of the constitutional order within America, and I would think the rise of what we call the administrative state. Woodrow Wilson's complaint is the same complaint of this theocrat, but in a different direction. That politics was not focused enough on the temporal good. And now what do we have? We have an entire apparatus within government that infringes upon every aspect of society, that blackmails politicians, that represents political interests when it's supposed to be representing administrative interests, and that are fundamentally unaccountable to the executive, all in the name of pursuing the good of society. This rhetoric, this language, this moral theory, this ideology has led us to places that are absolutely anti and un-American, that detach from the founding generation's idea of what we should have been. But this questioner represents that in a different way. His own self-righteousness makes him suppose that his view of politics would make the world run better because he believes you can force people to be virtuous, when the exact opposite is true. And if he was really a Christian, he would know that. But also, we have to ask the question, whose good are we talking about? There are 330 plus million people in America. All of them have different conceptions of the good. How do we determine whose claims deserve to have the force of policy backing them? Do we adhere to certain religious claims? If so, which religious claims? The claims of the Quakers, the claims of the Presbyterians, the claims of the Methodists, the claims of the Catholics. There are so many different denominations within America that have different views of theology, let alone politics, that it would be so hard to calculate and reconcile their ideas of the good. But beyond that, This is the chief problem of all claims of the common good of the good, or the good of the whole, is that you can't calculate the good of the whole. It is immeasurable because the good is merely a perception, and perceptions are infinitely malleable. The approach of Vivek's critic to American politics is an old world approach. It's an old world approach because in the old world before America was founded, they believed that both status and authority made the man, and both status and authority could make society good, which has been disproven by history, because the moment that status and authority fell from the mantle of power, societies actually began to flourish. America is actually the unleash of potential within America, within the bounds of freedom, within the bounds of creative will and individual choice, actually disproves the old world narrative in which we were plunged into darkness for hundreds upon hundreds of years, into squalor, into short lifespans, into abuses of authority by monarchs against their people, into emoluments, into so many different things, because there was a flawed conception of how authority should be used in society and a flawed conception of the human being. America changed that and showed the world the folly of the hundreds and hundreds of years of old world beliefs. But there are still people in our new world country, America, that have old world beliefs and wish to foist them upon all of us. Vivek's questioner is one of them. As I close, I must ask the question, my friends. Can American conservatism be a pluralistic project? And the question is meant to elaborate something. If America is a country we wish to preserve, we must have an idea of what it is. And if the idea of America is that only someone of a particular belief system religiously can be an American or can have American values, then that's an idea of America that flies in the face of hundreds of years of American political discourse, and flies in the face of the intents of the founding generation, and flies in the face in the first principles that the state constitutions and the U.S. constitutions are all founded upon. It flies in the face of everything that we can look at that is quintessentially American. It flies in the face of the innovations of the American mind. But if we're going to say that to preserve America, we can have different approaches. People have different belief systems, different lifestyles, you could even say, different walks of life that come together that want to preserve our common traditions. Then I think it's going to be a much more expansive project, a much more, I would say, successful project, and I would say a much more American project, because that is exactly the same kind of project that founded America. That is exactly the same kind of thinking, the bringing forth of people from different walks of life, people that even had different views, in some cases the Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist, to establish one of the greatest monuments to human potential ever known to mankind. Vivek should have pressed him on this. He has the intelligence to this. He should have crashed into this guy's wall of ignorance with what I'm saying. But someone's going to do it, and so I'm going to do it. My friends, let's think more philosophically. Resist the temptations of the old world and know that America, as unique and as beautiful and as, I think, pure as her idea is constantly being salivated over by people like this that don't like our history, that don't like our way of life, but claim to be conservative because they happen to have what they call based takes that involve forcing people to be virtuous, which is an impossibility. Reject that nonsense. Embrace Americanism, and I think we should also embrace reason. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe. Do whatever you can to get our message out there. Study history, study philosophy, remain more convicted, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.